Hello everybody, this is Kirby over yonder, and this is my top 10 list for Adventure Time Season 3. Season 3 has so many great episodes that it was hard picking only 10, so you can expect a lot of honorable mentions this time around. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Here's the list. At number 10, we have Memory of a Memory. Memory of a Memory is one of the most important episodes when it comes to developing Marceline as a character. There's something inherently mysterious about Marceline in these early seasons, and this episode does a great job giving her some more depth without giving away too much information. We get little details about Marcy's past, like the fact that she was a child right after the Mushroom War happened, and that she had a stuffed bear named Hambo. There's still much more of Marcy's past to be explored, but this episode helps paint a clearer picture of who Marceline is. But even aside from all that, the idea of Finn and Jake exploring a character's mind is such a novel and fun concept. I always get a kick out of this scene in particular. Poor Marcy. I also love the minimalist design of the memory core. It's just so artsy, a beautiful design overall. Ash himself is simply one of those characters who's just so fun to hate. There's something about him that's just so inherently douchey. He's not some big bad guy, he just knows how to manipulate Marcy. Which makes it all the more satisfying to see Marceline kick him in the boing loins at the end of the episode. Once again, all my homies hate Ash. And on top of all that, this is also the episode to give us the Tough Tootin' Baby song. Though personally, I'm a bigger fan of "You're not a genius. You're not a genius." I don't know why, I just quote this all the time, it's really funny to me. At number 9, we have Incendium. The way I see it, Incendium makes for a perfect season finale. Season 3 really leaned into Finn's crush on Princess Bubblegum, so to have it be the focus of the season finale just feels right. There's some great work here with Finn's facial expressions. You can really tell just how much of an emotional wreck he is in this one. Both of the songs in this episode are great. I love how they both have the same basic melody, but feel so distinct from each other in terms of tone. In general, the stuff with Jake trying to impress the Flame King is really fun and makes it so the episode isn't just 11 minutes of Finn being angsty. Jake's weird imitation of Finn is a joke that'll never cease to get a laugh out of me. And of course, this episode stars a fan-favorite character whom I could not imagine the series without. Flambeau. Such an overlooked character. It's a real shame the show doesn't do much with him. Nah, but for real, this episode also serves as the introduction of Flame Princess, who isn't a personal favorite character of mine, but a lot of people in the fandom are really attached to her. I'm really glad the show didn't pull a whole will they won't they with Finn and PB, and just gave Finn a new love interest. It's a great finale to a great season of Adventure Time. At number 8, we have Jake vs. Meow. Jake vs. Meow is one of the most stressful episodes of Season 3. The episode does a really great job putting Jake between a rock and a hard place, where he's forced to either kill Wildberry Princess or get killed himself. You really do feel bad for Jake being thrown into this tough existential nightmare. We get some great cringe comedy out of Jake being forced to keep this secret. But of course, the real star of the show here is Meow herself. She has such a cute design and voice that hearing her talk about assassinating Jake and Wildberry Princess makes for some great juxtaposition. Also, her height makes for some really interesting camera angles. I love this whole fight scene between her and Finn. I also love the solution to Jake being poisoned. Big Liver is a top-tier Adventure Time joke. Jake vs. Meow is an intense but very fun episode of Adventure Time, though it also features the Sleepy Puppies song, so make what you will of that. At number 7, we have Buttopia. I think what makes Buttopia so much fun is its character dynamics. You have Finn, who wants to help Susan and hopes that she's a human like him, contrasted against Jake, who's just so dead set on her being a crazy fish person. The episode keeps you on your toes because you don't completely know which of the two is right. You just gotta love the song in this one too. The way it just ends so abruptly is hilarious. And in general, this is just a really fun adventure episode. I love the designs for the Lub Glubs. The idea of these horrifying monsters designed to look like pool toys is really creative. The episode does a good job foreshadowing them too. I also really enjoy the running gag of Jake thinking that he's going crazy. It's really funny. And we get a little hint in this episode that maybe Susan actually is human just like Finn. A very thought-provoking note for the episode to end on. At number 6, we have Thank You. I think if there's one word to describe Thank You, it's charming. This thing is filled with charm. It doesn't have a super intricate plot or laugh-out-loud jokes. It's just a pleasant little story about two species that hate each other learning to get along. I really appreciate the boldness of this episode, to throw us into the story with no dialogue featuring characters we've never met before. The lack of dialogue helps immerse us into the atmosphere. It allows us to take in the little details without needless exposition talk. The story is simple enough to be understood through mostly visuals. I also really like the decision to have Finn and Jake fighting the Ice King as sort of a background subplot. It's really fun to see a typical encounter between them, but from an outsider's point of view. The end of the episode does a good job thematically connecting the two storylines, as well as foreshadow Finn and Jake growing empathy for the Ice King in just a few episodes. After this point, the show would continue to do stories starring one-off characters to, let's just say, mixed results. But I really think they hit it out of the park here, because the characters and story are simple enough for the audience to form a connection with. You don't need to have seen them in other episodes in order to get it. It's just a very pleasant episode, perfect to watch during Thanksgiving time. At number 5, we have No One Can Hear You. No One Can Hear You might be the most unsettling episode in all of Adventure Time. Seriously, this thing is messed up. From Jake's insanity, to the fact that Finn had maybe been unconscious for 6 months. And don't even get me started on the freak deer and his creepy little hands. This episode is great at building up that creepy atmosphere. There's just something so ominous about Finn and Jake being alone in the Candy Kingdom. It just feels so empty. And once Finn realizes that there's something wrong with Jake, he truly feels alone. It's really tragic hearing Finn admit to himself that his best friend is gone. It's an understated moment, but one that hits really hard. The climax to this one is awesome. Finn being forced to fight Jake, who's just gone completely crazy at this point, is something we don't really get to see very often in the show. The final confrontation between Finn and the deer is great too. I love how it's never explained who this deer is or what he wants with the candy people. He's just kinda left to die at the end of the episode. And then it's all just kinda brushed off at the end. The events of this episode are surprisingly never brought up again, to the point where if you really wanted to, you could consider it non-canon. But of course, I choose to believe that an episode as ridiculous and screwed up as this actually happened. At number 4, we have Hitman. I'm gonna be real with you guys. Hitman isn't this high on the list because of its story or character writing, or anything like that. Hitman is number 4 on this list because of its jokes. This might be the single funniest episode in all of Adventure Time. You got Finn and Jake grounding the Ice King, the Ice King's bubble butt, Ice King literally only wanting to hit Finn and Jake, the singing deer head, the design for the Hitman, Jake getting all existential about Meatman, and, in my opinion, the single greatest joke in all of Adventure Time, Boing-loins. The way the Ice King just holds on that line, combined with how inherently funny the word Boing-loins itself is, makes for a scene that I just quote constantly. And in addition to all that, the Scorcher himself makes for a pretty great one-off villain. There's just something really fun about putting this ultra-serious, no-nonsense type character in the middle of one of the goofiest episodes of the entire show. Ice King is able to play off him surprisingly well. And speaking of Ice King, this is the first episode to take place entirely from his perspective, which helps make it stand out compared to other Ice King episodes. Hitman is just a laugh riot of an episode, and sometimes that's all an episode really needs to be in order to be one of my favorites. At number 3, we have Holly Jolly Secrets, Parts 1 and 2. I've heard some people say that Holly Jolly Secrets is boring, or that it doesn't need to be a two-parter, and while it's perfectly fine for them to have those opinions, I could never really get behind those statements. Because there's actually a lot of variety to Holly Jolly Secrets. Sure, this episode definitely could have been boring if it was just Finn and Jake watching the Ice King's tapes. But the episode knows this and intersplices it between scenes of Finn and Jake trying to decode the tapes, as well as the Ice King subplot in which he tries to break into the treehouse to watch the tapes with Finn and Jake. It makes for a really nice Finn and Jake hangout episode. It has a really cozy feeling to it, which makes it a great watch during the holidays. But at the same time, you can also feel it building to something, especially with the Ice King subplot. There's some great jokes here too. I love this whole phone call sequence between Finn and the Ice King. Finn and Jake setting up flyers just to tell everyone not to come. The screw the audience moment. The fact that BMO's code comes out to look like Gunter. Ice King using the tablecloth as clothing. The Rudolph reference. My favorite of the Ice King's tapes is probably this news report one. I just love how uncomfortable Wildberry Princess looks here. Between this and Jake vs. Meow, this season really wasn't kind to her. But of course, the absolute highlight of the episode is the final tape. I think what I love most about this scene is just how out of nowhere it is. How one moment we're watching the Ice King's goofy secret tapes, and the next we're watching his tragic backstory. It's tonal whiplash, but in the best way possible. Because we're right in Finn and Jake's shoes the entire time. It's just as shocking to them as it is to us. It's a perfect scene that changes the way the characters and we the audience view the Ice King. It makes for both a huge game-changing episode of Adventure Time, as well as just a pleasant, nice watch around the holidays. And I think an episode having that level of variety to it is something special. At number 2, we have What Was Missing. I think what I love most about What Was Missing is just how raw it feels. I mean, this is basically a bottle episode, with very little action and not much adventure. But because of that, the episode is able to primarily focus on its character interactions. This is our first real dive into the relationship between Marceline and Princess Bubblegum, in which we get more of that bitter essence dynamic we briefly saw in Go With Me. You could argue that this is the episode responsible for Adventure Time having such a heavily queer audience, so thanks What Was Missing. I love Finn's role as sort of the middleman in all of this. He's sort of put in this awkward situation where he just wants everyone to be happy. I can definitely relate to his position here of being put in the middle of a more serious conversation and being sort of out of the loop. You could argue that Jake doesn't get a lot to do here, but at the very least him being the jerk of the band makes for a solid running gag. And speaking of gags, I'll Get Your Kid Back Toy is one of my all-time favorite Adventure Time lines. It's even funnier knowing that Shada said that by accident, but the crew kept it in because they just thought it was funny. But of course, the absolute highlight of this episode is both of the songs. I'm Just Your Problem and What Am I to You are both top-tier Adventure Time songs. I love the detail that the door only responds well to the truth, because it says a lot about how the characters truly feel about each other. How Marceline has always felt like she's not good enough for PB, and has grown disdain to her because of that. But at the end of the day, she doesn't want anything bad to happen to her. She still cares about her. This episode hits pretty hard after Obsidian. Or how Finn feels like a bit of an outsider, possibly due to being the only human that he knows of, but he still cares about his friends anyway. And on top of all that, the Door Lord makes for a great one-off villain. His weird sort of nonsense talk is just hilarious to me. I love the fact that the crew is able to pick up on the lesson he's trying to teach them, but they still beat him up anyways. A great subversive joke. What Was Missing is just a classic episode. One of the all-time best as far as I'm concerned. And my favorite Adventure Time Season 3 episode is Dad's Dungeon. I think what makes Dad's Dungeon so special to me is the fact that it's able to so expertly blend this fun dungeon romp with a strong emotional character journey for Finn. The dungeon itself has some really fun and memorable set pieces. The dumb-looking rock, the hamburger and hot dog monsters, this really gross guy, this really gorgeous and atmospheric flower path that just becomes super demonic, and the dimly lit final room with the family sword. It all just makes for such an interesting and unpredictable dungeon to watch Finn and Jake traverse. But at the center of all of it is such a great character relationship story between Finn and Joshua. It almost feels sort of ahead of its time, the way it's able to commentate on toxic masculinity. The way that Joshua thinks that him and Jake teasing Finn will teach him to be tough, but in reality, Finn already was tough, and all the teasing did was make him feel worse about himself. Just like most people in the real world, Finn responds well to positive reinforcement. There's some great character progression here too, how at first Finn is just kinda confused by Joshua's teasing, but by the end is just full-on depressed. As funny as it is, I love how the scene with the gross guy is able to thematically connect with this idea. Simply telling the guy that he's gross only serves as to make him feel bad. But when they let him know that they're only being real with him because they're bros, the idea that he needs to take a bath is able to get through to him. At the same time though, I like that Joshua himself isn't necessarily a bad player in this game. Sure, he was wrong about the way in which to toughen Finn up, but at the end of the day, he's only doing it because he loves and cares about Finn and wants what's best for him. He couldn't have given Finn that final message if this wasn't the case. And speaking of which, the climax of this episode is just so awesome. With just how huge the monster is, the light from its eyes shining down on Finn in what's otherwise a very dimly lit room, and all while a remix of Joshua's final message plays in the background. This scene is just so cool, it gives me goosebumps every time I watch it. And it's the first time we see the demon sword in action, a pretty cool sword that Finn uses throughout a good chunk of the series. And it's made out of babies. Dead's Dungeon is just a masterpiece. Very few episodes live up to its level of brilliance, in my opinion. It's one of my all-time favorite Adventure Time episodes. Well, that was the list, however, we're not quite done yet, because Season 3 is so good that I have 4 honorable mentions. We have Morituri te Salutamos for its great action and use of juxtaposition, The Creeps for its spooky atmosphere and fun character interactions, The New Frontier for just how existential and dark it all is while still managing to be really fun, and Marceline's Closet for its great jokes and very interesting look at Marceline's domestic life. And those were my favorite Adventure Time Season 3 episodes. Please let me know what your favorites are in the comments, and I'll see you all for Season 4. Kirby, out.